Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. So yeah, thank you for joining us. I am Lisa Kramer, RISD's Fulbright Program Advisor. And with me, we have Christine Cho, who received her RISD BFA in painting in 2019 and a Fulbright to South Korea. And it is morning in South Korea. So good morning, Christine. We also have Derek Russell, who received his RISD degree in architecture in 2022 and a Fulbright to Ecuador. And Derek is actually back in New York City for a bit, so it's good to see you, Derek. And then we have Kevin Jankowski, our RISD Careers Director, who is a fantastic RISD Fulbright reviewer and interviewer. He also supports me to best support all of you. Kevin will help pull the strings tonight and help facilitate our Q&A. So hello, Kevin. So for this webinar, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature at any time. We'll answer as many questions as possible after Christine and Derek's presentations. The chat box will be used only by us to share things out to you. And know that this is being recorded and will be posted on our website. All right, so before the great presentations by Christine and Derek, I'm going to play a video tutorial on all things Fulbright. I have recorded this in advance to streamline the information and ensure you have all the core information in one place. This video is from 2025 because the Fulbright 2026 cycle doesn't open until April. I will update this tutorial in April, and while there may be some changes, the heart of Fulbright that you will hear in this presentation will not. So after the video, we'll hear from Christine and Derek, and then we'll have an open Q&A discussion, and we hope you stick around because there's a lot of learning that happens just from hearing other people's questions. So we're going to go to the video. I'm going to share my Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Things Fulbright U.S. Student Program for RISD artists and designers. The Fulbright U.S. Student Program provides 6 to 12 month fully funded grants abroad for graduating students and recent graduates to conduct individually designed creative research projects, enroll in graduate school, or teach English. I'm Lisa Kramer. I'm RISD's Fulbright Program Advisor, or FPA. Fulbright is an intense process. My job is to make it more exciting rather than overwhelming, and to help you understand the process and mission so you learn and grow from each step. I'm here to help you at all stages of the application cycle to pull all the pieces together into a compelling proposal, no matter your discipline or project content. Fulbright is also a long process. To briefly outline the timeline, you will start working on this in the winter or spring, maybe even earlier. Things will intensify during the summer as you pull all the pieces together. You will submit early fall. Then the following spring, you are notified of the decision. Grants begin late summer or fall, a year after you submitted, or even the winter of the next year for some countries. Once you start the application process, the grant is a good year away. So if you are intending to apply this year, great. Consider that you will need to set some time aside for Fulbright between spring through September. If you are interested in next year or the year after, also great. It is never too early to start thinking about a Fulbright grant. Some can pull this off in 5 to 6 months, but many may take 1 to 2 years to develop their proposal. In any case, you are here now and will learn a great deal no matter how far you go in Fulbright exploration. So about Fulbright. The mission is to foster mutual understanding between nations, advance knowledge across communities, and improve lives around the world. It was created in Congress in 1946 to promote international goodwill through the exchange of students in the fields of education, culture, and science. It is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. This is a U.S. government grant, which you should keep in mind as you consider your audience. It is administered in the U.S. by the Institute of International Education, IIE, and it is administered overseas by binational commissions and U.S. embassies. Both the needs and priorities of the host country and of the U.S. should be considered when crafting your application. It is also very important that you always keep in mind that Fulbright is at heart about meaningful cross-cultural exchange. This grant is open to graduating seniors and fifth-year students. You may begin the application process in your junior year or fourth year, but won't be able to submit an application until the fall of your senior year or fifth year. It is open to graduate students and to recent graduates. Know that you can apply through RISD up to 3 years after graduation. You must be a U.S. citizen by the application deadline, have a bachelor's degree by the start of the grant, be proficient in the language of the host country, and have limited experience in the host country. Applicants who have had extensive recent experience in the host country or extensive foreign experience are eligible to apply, but may be at a competitive disadvantage. Plus, there are unique country-specific requirements. There are two main grants. The Study Research Grant, which is independent research, study, or arts projects abroad for 6 to 12 months offered in 140 countries. English teaching assistantships are an opportunity for you to help teach English and U.S. culture in a classroom for 8 to 10 months offered in 75 countries. I'm going to focus on the Study Research Grant as that is what most RISD students are interested in. But know that we are happy to help you with an ETA application too. Keep in mind that the ETA opportunity comes with the expectation that you have experience in teaching, experience in working with non-native English speakers, specific teaching ideas and methods, and can make clear connections as to why teaching English will support your long-term goals. If you're applying for the Study Research Grant in the creative arts, you will need a well-developed project and/or study plan that improves your craft, which means art and design making needs to be central in the study, research, and outcomes. You will need to make your case for participating, learning, and growing as an artist. You need to develop and document a host country affiliation relationship. This might be with a university, research think tank, lab, library, community organization, or nonprofit, in which you receive mentorship and critique, maybe access to facilities or equipment. Maybe you're taking a class or workshop. Plus, you could be supporting their research or class or assisting in a production or a conference. You will need a compelling visual portfolio that supports your proposed grant activities. Consider that your portfolio will be reviewed by U.S. artists and designers, and host countries experts who are likely not all artists and designers. You need to include meaningful host country engagement activities and have a high level of academic, professional, and/or artistic achievement, along with demonstrated leadership, flexibility, adaptability, and openness. What are the award benefits? Round-trip airfare, a monthly stipend, accident and sickness benefit, and other possible benefits depending on the host country. Once you return from a Fulbright experience, you will have gained new skills, perspectives, and insights that will influence you for the rest of your life, along with Fulbright being a great opportunity to build your network overseas and develop lifelong friendships. This delightful image is of RISD alums Ying and Christine meeting up in Seoul years after their Fulbright experiences. One of the most common questions about benefits is, can I defer my loans while I'm on a Fulbright grant for a year? And the answer is yes. What does a Fulbright project look like? It's so hard to define. There are so many variables from your skills and interests to your affiliate's area of expertise. And there are 140 countries, each with their own interests and requirements. The possibilities are endless. But there are basically 3 broad types with lots of gray area in between. Independent study research is the traditional Fulbright award in which you design a project from beginning to end that allows you to work with people of the host country to mutually advance in your field of interest. Some countries offer graduate enrollment as an option. In this case, the program, activities, and outcomes are set. It's graduate study. However, this can be tricky as you have to make a case for this isn't just being about funding for graduate study. Why is this a Fulbright? What is the meaningful cross-cultural exchange? Why this country? How is this something you can't do in the U.S.? It is important that you make a case for how your exploration goes beyond the institution of graduate study. And for most countries, you also have to be accepted to the university program, usually a separate process. This is what most RISD Fulbrighters do, hybrids. Most have some connection to a university, academy, or institution in which there is some structured learning, perhaps as a guest student, plus some sort of independent mission, a burning question guiding their exploration. Usually to do this effectively, RISD applicants have secondary affiliations, which get them out in the community, exploring, practicing, and applying their skills and learning. Let's move on to the Fulbright resources. The Fulbright website is extensive. Everything you need is there. But because there is so much to navigate, I'm going to give you a tour and highlight the important pages for you to review. First, be sure you're on the Fulbright U.S. Student Program website, not the Fulbright Scholars website or a host country's Fulbright website. Make sure it says U.S. Student at the top. Probably the most exciting pages are the country information and requirements found here by region. For example, let's look at the Philippines. Here you will find the award profile and grant length, anything in particular they are looking for in candidates, such as disciplines, area of focus, or degree level. Of course, you will want to check out the language requirement right away. Any restrictions or preferences on affiliation will be listed on this page, and you will find helpful information on the award benefits, stipend, and cost of living. And you may find a link to the host country website with additional country-specific resources. You may even find an email to an actual human that you can reach out to. Process information is found under the Applicants tab, Application Component. Choose the grant, Creative and Performing Arts. Here you'll find each application component with drop-downs that include considerable details with instruction and tips. Portfolio requirements are found here. Then one more click, the link to required materials will take you here, where you will find a drop-down for the requirements of each Fulbright discipline. You will have to choose a discipline. There is no multidisciplinary option. It's not that you can't have a multidisciplinary practice or project, but because there are so many applicants, they have to put you in categories. So you will have to choose what best fits your project and consider your audience. The link to the online application, which opens in early April, is found here. Fulbright offers webinars April through October under the Applicants tab under Information Session. These are one-hour sessions in which you will hear from Fulbright experts and hear questions from your peers around the country. It is important that you listen to at least a couple of these. I listen to 8 to 10 every year and learn a little something new each time. It is also important that you hear from Fulbright directly to confirm what I'm telling you and to provide you with new perspectives. If you see one you are really interested in but miss it, make note. Then go to Recorded Webinars. Here you can listen to webinars of interest when you have time. I am often an applicant's first go-to, but know that Fulbright program officers who work for IIE are there to help too. Sometimes I don't know the country-specific answer. There are 140 countries, so it will be best for you to email or call the program officer directly. Their contact information can be found by going to Contacts in tiny white font at the bottom of the page. Also, in tiny white font at the bottom, you will find a link to a page of interesting statistics. You will find applications and awards for each country. I did the math here, and in 2025-2026, for the Czech Republic, 20% of the study research applications were awarded, and 7% for New Zealand. By no means should statistics solely guide your choice. If you are passionate about a country and your project is a great fit for that country, don't look at the statistics. But if you are open, the statistics may help you make a decision. You may want to poke around in the statistics and consider a less competitive country. Obviously, English-speaking countries are more competitive. The UK is by far the most competitive. If you speak another language, consider how that might be an advantage. If you don't speak another language, consider a country like Latvia or Norway with no language requirement, or Laos or Malaysia that have more flexible language requirements. Learning some of the language is still important to these countries, but because their language is not commonly taught in the US, they are more flexible. Under the Alumni tab, you will find a grantee directory with Fulbright alumni across the country in all disciplines. There's not a lot of information on each Fulbrighter here, but the directory may give you some project idea leads or help you determine the country's interest, and maybe even lead you to someone to contact. Fulbrighters are often happy to talk to applicants about their experience. I did a search on sculpture and India, which resulted in 13 Fulbrighters, including RISD alum Lindsay Carone, one of RISD's 114 Fulbrighters who have explored their creative project in 45 different countries. When looking for Fulbright artists for inspiration or support, I suggest you start at the RISD Careers website. Scroll down to learn more about Fulbright, and then to the RISD Fulbright Showcase. You will get to a site of RISD Fulbrighters. There are 50+ RISD Fulbrighters on this website. In stories, you can read about their projects, and you can connect with them through their personal websites or see what they're up to on their Instagrams. In the Experience Gallery, you can see some great photos of their lives and the people they worked with while on the Fulbright grant. And in the Artwork Gallery, you can see what they submitted to receive the grant or the results of their project. This website is a great place to go for inspiration and make connections. But for the nitty-gritty, how does this actually happen for RISD students? Go back to the Fulbright section of the RISD Careers website. There are two very important documents to guide your process: the checklist and deadline, and getting started. First, though, consider, will you be applying through RISD? If enrolled or an alum who graduated in the past 3 years, you have the option to apply through RISD. But you are welcome to apply on your own, which Fulbright calls at large, and it is not seen as a disadvantage by Fulbright in any way. Note that the pro to applying through RISD is you will receive intensive support throughout the process. But the con may be that you must follow RISD's internal deadlines. We require applicants to kickstart in May and have a close to complete application in mid-August in order to receive a campus review and interview. Our internal deadlines are in place so we can effectively, efficiently, and fairly support you all through the process. But they are also in place for your benefit. We know from past experience that applicants who start late really struggle and then decide to wait until next year, which is fine. Lots of applicants have a false start and come back stronger the next year. This is RISD's checklist and deadlines, which you saw earlier. This is just the first page of this document, a visual look at the deadline. This document goes on to provide additional milestones for each application component. This document will help guide your process. Be sure to check out this document on the website for exact dates, but know that the first deadline is the Kickstart meeting in mid-May, where you confirm your intent and country choice, and we assure you are ready to go. The second deadline is your first draft, due early June. In mid-August, you will lock your application for a RISD review of your entire application package and portfolio, and for the RISD interview. Keep in mind, summer can be very challenging considering that many countries have a culture of long holidays in the summer, and holiday means a real break. You may find that affiliate contacts are not available, particularly mid-July to early September. And we strongly encourage you to send documents before the deadline. This will provide you with more time to redraft, incorporate feedback, fine-tune, and move on to your next draft or another application component. The second important document is the RISD Getting Started. You're really going to want to jump into this document. This is the index page. The first thing you'll notice is that it is really long, but consider that this is a condensed version of everything for RISD artists and designers in one place with guidance based on our experience working with many applicants over the years. This is your resource. Take the time to read it once over and then use it as a reference throughout the process. The RISD Getting Started document walks you through each application component with detailed advice. Plus, it has valuable information on what makes you a strong candidate and what makes a competitive proposal. So what are the components? Affiliation. Applicants must find and arrange their affiliation. Countries have specific requirements, but it is usually with a university, nonprofit, or research think tank. It cannot be with a for-profit company. Applicants must build the relationship and then document the nature of the relationship in a letter. Yes, this can be hard and take time. So start early, just do it. Don't wait for the perfect draft or perfect project idea. Who your affiliate is, what they can offer, what they would like in return, will affect your project ideas and proposal. You want to work with your affiliate to develop your project. There are tips in the Getting Started document to help your research and develop your affiliation. We also have an email outreach template and actual affiliate letters we can review with you during advising appointments. Statement of grant purpose. This is a 6,000 character statement outlining all the details and purpose of your project. Do consider that less is more. One thoughtful idea will be more effective than many. The purpose statement needs to be a clear and straightforward plan. You need a focused, unique direction to get busy reviewers on board. How do you do this? There are a number of tools to get you started on project development and writing. In the RISD Getting Started document under the application component, Statement of Grant Purpose, you can find these prompts to ensure you are hitting key content. This is, in a sense, a way to interview yourself. You can use these prompts as headers to help you focus, and then as your drafts develop, you will delete and transition. In fact, I often use them as a checklist when I review your first draft. Feasibility is key. You will need a strong how plan section with details and a timeline. This will take up a good half of your character space. It is hard to imagine a project in another country that will take place in a year or more from now, but that is what you will have to do. Imagine, and know that it is okay if that plan changes. You need a plan to help reviewers understand and visualize what you will do and to get it out the door. There are 3 important essays about how you will fulfill the Fulbright mission. The first is flexibility and adaptability. You have 2,000 characters to talk about how you're prepared to adapt to working and living in another country. The second is community engagement. You have 2,000 characters to talk about how you will engage with the people of the host country. And third, impact. 1,000 characters to talk about how you will share your Fulbright experience with others and how a Fulbright experience will help you realize your future goals. For your narrative, consider the Getting Started document, the section on what makes a competitive proposal. For each of these green bullets, you will find a detailed description of what Fulbright is looking for. Read this now at the beginning and keep referring back to it as you develop your proposal. In addition, continue asking yourself the 2 big important questions. First, why this country? Beyond the institution you will be working with, if you picked up this project for Singapore and moved it to Japan, is it the same thing? How is it unique to Singapore? Second, how will this experience improve your craft? Beyond inspiration or a new place to practice, what skills are you gaining to specifically improve your craft in this particular country? Language forms. Depending on the country, a language self-evaluation and a professional evaluation may be required or recommended. 3 recommendation letters are required. Choose wisely in terms of who will write a meaningful letter and who will be timely. At the application stage, unofficial transcripts are required, so you will need to collect these documents, scan them neatly, and upload them into the application. The online application is really long and includes additional short answer essays. Start this early. This is not a last-minute thing, and be neat and consistent in both content and in formatting. You want to have a strong application package from beginning to end. And finally, portfolio. I have this last, not because it isn't important. It is extremely important, but you are the experts on this. You know how to do this well. I highly recommend you check out this 10-minute video found on the RISD Fulbright page. And here are a few pointers. Follow the instructions. How many? Size, resolution, minutes. Make your case with effective, high-quality images. Consider every image counts. Every image should tell a story that supports your purpose and path. You can have some detail shots, maybe an installation shot, but no throwaways. And use collaged images sparingly. There can be a couple of collaged images where it makes sense, but too many is overwhelming and diminishes the look and feel of a whole piece as a single image. There really needs to be a reason for more than one view in an image. Otherwise, it seems like sneaking in additional pieces to gain an advantage. Make the connection to your grant project through your images. Your gallery-ready portfolio may not be the same as your project portfolio. Focus on the fit to your project. And consider your audience carefully. Your reviewers are not only artists. For the host country interview, a RISD semifinalist whose discipline was photography was interviewed by a writer, a policy expert, and a dentist. Yep, a dentist. A great example of how important it is to develop an application that speaks to a varied audience. Use the image description space to help make your case. Not only title, size, and material, tell us more. This is your chance to make connections. This is your chance to show your preparedness, yet room for growth. This is your chance to tell your reviewers, especially your non-art reviewers, more about your process and ways of thinking. Take advantage of this space. Curate the order thoughtfully for a cohesive portfolio feel. A curated portfolio shows organized thinking and thoughtfulness. It shows you care more about this opportunity. Be sure to start strong to capture their attention and make them want to see more. Be sure to end strong, as that last image will stay on their mind as they move to other parts of your application. And in a group review, that last image may stay up on the screen as they talk about your application. You want that image to be strong and connected to what you are proposing. A final tip, print each image you are considering on half sheets of paper and tape them to a wall. Stand back and really look at them and then move them around to find that compelling flow. The final weeks can be fairly intense, so I'm going to walk you through the submission steps. If you are applying through RISD, you will lock your application for an end-to-end review of your application package, including your portfolio, and you want a complete application at this point. I then arrange your RISD Fulbright interview. Know that RISD is not a gatekeeper. RISD interviewers do not make decisions. The interview purpose is to help determine if the applicant is prepared to carry out their proposed project and thrive in the host country. After your interview, you will have a last chance for fine-tuning. This stage is up to you. You want to be careful to make select, very minor changes to strengthen. Reworking after months of work doesn't usually work out that well. And then you submit. Art applications are first reviewed by U.S. experts by discipline, and semifinalist decisions are announced in late January. Semifinalist applications then go to host countries for review. The U.S. government approves final decision. And then finalists are announced anytime between March and June. I've given you a lot of information and resources, but how do you get started? Grant writing is just as much about organization skills as it is project development. Develop organizational tools based on your style to keep track of your research, drafts, and affiliate outreach, and set personal milestones to help you meet the deadline. Review the country summary pages, which is really exciting and is important to find out early on if there are restrictions, preferences, or special requirements. Start drafting your purpose statement and essays early. The first draft, the commitment in writing, and the feedback you receive, this is when things really take off. Find help. Ask for help. This is a complicated grant. Find people who will support your application process. Meet with me, but not only me. I'm only one voice in this process. Find someone in your discipline to guide your research and content. Find someone to give you feedback on your image choices. Get a professor on board early on in your process. Reach out to the RISD Center for Arts and Language. They are an excellent resource for brainstorming or fine-tuning your proposal. Make use of the incredible resources at the RISD Library. Talk to RISD Global about where RISD might have connections in your host country. A word of advice on getting help. Get advice early in the process rather than so much at the end. At the beginning, all voices are important. At the end, your voice is important. Last-minute advice is dangerous as it can really throw you off. Everyone will see something different. Well-intentioned advice can send you down a rabbit hole after months of hard work, and it is really hard to recover from that. Avoid getting help from professional editors or AI. Fulbright wants to hear from you with all your unique humanness. And 2 more resources for you. On the RISD Fulbright page, scroll down to Tips from a RISD Fulbrighter, click on Learn More, and you will go to a document full of excellent insights and tips from RISD Fulbrighter to the Philippines, Ben Allen, and RISD Fulbrighter to Brazil, Gail Foreman. I want to leave you with a reminder of the first deadlines. Schedule your Kickstart meeting to take place by mid-May. You can make an appointment with me on the RISD Careers website. At some point, depending on the applicant pool, I'm only open for appointments with those applying this year. But RISD Career Advisors Jason and Scott will continue taking appointments for those interested in a future Fulbright application. First drafts are due early June. This is a draft, and there will be many more, but it should be a serious, thoughtful draft, not an outline, not bullets, and close to the character count limit and proofed for typos and grammar errors. You don't have to have all the answers for the first draft. Start pretending and imagining. The more thoughtful your drafts are, the deeper I can go in my review to provide feedback that will help you take it to the next level. Be sure to check the checklist and deadlines on the RISD Fulbright page for the exact dates. And finally, it will not be a waste of time. I want to emphasize what an amazing experience Fulbright is. This is an extremely competitive grant. It is important that you embark on this journey understanding that the process itself is a valuable experience, from the research to developing relationships overseas, to writing, to submitting. A Fulbright proposal is a lot of work, maybe the most intense proposal you will ever write. After a Fulbright application, other grants might seem easy. I look forward to working with you. Thank you, everyone. Good. So just a few quick Fulbright updates before we hear from Derek and then Christine. Some exciting news. We have 8 RISD Fulbright semifinalists this year, so they are waiting right now to hear their final decisions. Second, the 2026 Fulbright cycle is scheduled to open April 1st, so do set a time aside to poke around in April to make sure there's been no changes to the country you're interested in. And we do have deadline dates. So if you're going to apply through RISD, the first deadline will be May 21st. That's the Kickstart intent to apply meeting with me, and first drafts are due June 3rd. Also, if you would like to receive e-blasts from me about Fulbright, please email me. I'll put my email in the chat in just a second, but feel free to reach out and I'll put you on my list. So we're going to first hear from Derek, and then we'll hear from Christine. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you can share screen and take it away.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Lisa. So, thank you everyone for being here. It's really a pleasure to speak with you about my recent Fulbright work. I'm RISD's most recent Fulbright alumni coming back this summer from 2025. So, I was selected as a research arts IE recipient with an architecture project for 2024-2025 year. I titled my project Con and Ara, Mending Climates with Vernacular Cosmovisions, and I was selected to go to the country of Ecuador. So, with that, I'll just go ahead and dive into the sort of life of living in Ecuador and being there. And I think that I was really interested in looking at multiple cultures, looking at the ways that architecture can adapt to climate. And Ecuador seemed like the perfect place to do it. It is one of the most biodiverse countries on the planet. And it also has upwards of 14 different indigenous languages present within the country itself. And so it's one of only two countries in the world that's actually plurinational. So the full name of the country is actually the plurinational state of Ecuador. And so for me, that was something that was really interesting. I was really interested in this aspect of traditional ecological knowledge. Yeah, and kind of synthesizing that into my own architectural practice and what that meant. So here is our crew. Here's the group of grantees from that year as well. We are there in the Quito Centro Histórico. And my project mostly was based out of Cuenca, which was in the south of the country of Ecuador. When I was researching Ecuador and going to select a location, I chose Cuenca partially for its relationship to this Spanish colonial architecture that you can find on display in many countries in Latin America, but also to its close connections to different Andean indigenous groups and communities, specifically Quechua. And so something that my project specifically was looking for was different, we call them vernacular typologies of architecture. So that is different materials and then how those specifically relate to how the building itself is constructed, right? So for those of you who are in the world of architecture, we call that vernacular architecture. And Con and Ara, which was the framework for this whole proposal, is actually a mythology that comes from Cuenca, and that is basically the marriage between two Macaw women from the Amazon and two men from the Cañari civilization here in Cuenca, which kind of bred this new society of cultivation in the region. And so I liked that as a metaphor and a framework for my research. And I thought it was nice to think about how nature and how different microclimates can actually impact the outcomes of architecture. And then, of course, connecting that to culture and preservation and whatnot. So, with that being said, I think as many other Fulbrighters in the past, the Fulbright journey can be quite a meandering one, and we are kind of asked to adapt quickly and asked to find cultural competency very quickly. And so when I arrived in Cuenca, the museum that I was supposed to work at, Museum Pumapungo, was actually closed at the time because they were preparing for an international conference with different leaders from other Latin American countries and was undergoing refurbishment. And so this was also paired with a kind of difficult time for the country of Ecuador. They were in a severe drought. We were experiencing wildfires in different parts of the country. And this also led to power outages that could go out between 8 to 12 hours a day. And so it was a lot to navigate and work with, but I think it forced me to be creative in terms of solidifying my affiliations that I had made during the application process and looking for new opportunities. So here's an example of one of those. This is from a bookstore near me that had a lot of anthropological and archaeological texts that I was visiting quite frequently. And just to give some background, this is from another museum in Quito that became one of my partial affiliations as well, Museo Alabado. And so it was a really interesting process to begin to dive into this research and something that I wanted to start with in this kind of downtime when I was really figuring out my project, really figuring out what I wanted to do and say with my Fulbright work was look to the past. And so I spent some time networking and working actually with archaeologists and anthropologists to do work in different indigenous communities. So this is kind of a survey of some of the artifacts from these displays and something that I have always been interested in, and something that kind of carried through as a through line in my research, is just this sense that nature and climate are connected to art and the way that we express art in buildings. So I compare those, previous examples to this. This is the Andean Sierra, and specifically the Páramo, which is a really unique ecoregion in the world, and something that I really observed quite quickly was the relationship between culture and the way that cultures express themselves, but also nature and how those two are connected. So I was actually able to go on a few different archaeological site visits. So this was with one of my key affiliates, institutional affiliates, the Universidad de San Francisco de Quito. And I will note that Ecuador was a rather unique country and they allow for different types of affiliations. I know some countries look for specifically universities. And so I did have a university affiliation, but I also had various institutional affiliations through museums, through actual indigenous politicians as well. So it was quite a diverse project with various constituents, various moving parts. Again, a lot of this was kind of learned along the way. So here's an example of another one of those site visits that I did. This is Ingapurca, an Incan temple of the sun. This is the largest Incan ruin present in Ecuador, kind of nearby where I was living at the time. And then just an example of some of my creative research that I was doing at the time, synthesizing some of my photography, the different buildings and structures and trips that I had been on, as well as just a glimpse into my studio space and what that project all really looked like as it was unfolding. So the first half of my proposal had been focused in the Andean highlands, and the second half of the proposal, I switched gear and I moved to the Amazonian River Basin. So, as I mentioned earlier, Ecuador is a plurinational nation, and so I was working with La Nacionalidad Achuar, and this is a group in the south of the country, an indigenous group, and they very graciously were excited to host me for this process. So this is a photo that I took upon my arrival there. I did have to take a canoe a few hours into the rainforest to arrive at this specific field site. I believe I was there for about 2.5 months in total. So it was not a small portion of the grant for sure. So I just wanted to start off with some other photos of this really beautiful and biodiverse region. I think that understanding these places can help us understand why it's important to preserve them, but also why it's important to really preserve the cultures and the cultural memory of the art being created in these places. Some of the wildlife that I was fortunate enough to glimpse. Here's a wonderful monkey as well. And this is really kind of the meat of what I was looking into, specifically with the Achuar communities, looking at the Achuar typical house and the different variants of it and how that can relate to or shift in, different adapting climates and microclimates. And so this is an example of some scaffolding that was being used to create one of these architectural houses. And this is my lovely host family, Sylvia and Francisco, who were very generous in volunteering their time for this project. And I got very close with their two sons who were there living with us, although they have quite a large family. So, and I wanted to put in this photo as well so that folks can see that this is where I was living for my field research while I was in the Amazon. So I was effectively camping in the jungle. So that was quite a unique experience for sure. This is an example just of, some of the downtime in the community. They a lot of times had soccer games, matches, especially those paired with ceremonies. So as much time as I was there researching, I was also spending time getting to know members of the community, getting to know the kind of personal histories, stories, and struggles and whatnot, and learning a bit of the native language. I know that language requirements are a part of many of the Fulbright proposals. Ecuador does have a Spanish requirement, and luckily, because I was working in different indigenous communities that have different languages that are not so common and that you cannot study. So this language is Shubiad, and I was working in another community that you'll see later, and their language was Paikoka. So it freed me up to give some more time to learn a bit of those languages and to, begin to understand how to communicate with folks who are not sort of in that Romance language sphere. So this was the beginning of a collaborative project that we were working on, again, flexing my architecture muscle a little bit with this community as we were brainstorming a decentralized way to create a eco-village using their local vernacular typologies. And then, of course, employing that in a unique way that they felt represented them, their identity, but also could bring in additional revenue for the community. So all of this really left me feeling like I wanted a culminating project or culminating event. And so luckily, the Fulbright Commission at the time had partnered with a group called the Lois Roth Foundation, and they were offering subsidiary grants to Fulbright researchers to apply to. So I applied for a subsidiary grant through the Fulbright and received it from the Lois Roth Foundation. And so what I did with that was I decided to create a multi-day residency in one of the other indigenous communities. This was in the Sequoia Nation, and invite other artists from across the country who are indigenous artists to come and create a Skillshare workshop and to work with one another around traditional ecological knowledge and to really bridge that dialogue gap that isn't being had in many parts of the country. I think that I felt because I had been working in so many different field sites that I really wanted something that synthesized folks, but again, also generated that dialogue that was very difficult for folks who either don't have a large degree of mobility or just access to the internet, other necessities that kind of keep people connected in the modern time. So here is a view of Sequoia Remolino. We can see the typological architecture looks a little bit different than what we've seen in some of the other areas. This is Yadira Okagwahe, who was my affiliate, who was a major component of helping me get this project off the ground. She is the leader of the women's ceramic group Kenyao, and they are an entrepreneurial collective who began, I believe, in the around 2020. And I had actually connected with them on an earlier visit to Ecuador before my Fulbright, and so they are, very close to me and have been a major voice in sort of the development of this collaborative process that I have been able to do through my Fulbright as well. So here is Yadi again and some other women from the community, and these are all women who are participating in the workshop that I had been able to organize with Lois Roth. So here is kind of an example of what the programming looked like during this multi-day workshop that folks were vested in. So this is from Ana Alvarado, and she was teaching folks how to create baskets from different vines. And I think that these vines were also invasive vines in the rainforest. And so there was kind of a sense of stewardship in this understanding of the biological processes that can be used in the creation of art. This is just an example of a Palo Brazil tree being stripped and its bark being used for a certain dye. This is an example of some of the traditional Seiko Pai crafts and beaded necklaces that were also being created and being shared during this residency slash workshop. This was my contribution, a workshop around papermaking and printmaking using natural dyes and local materials found directly in the Amazon. Here is a photo of me taking all of these wonderful photos. And afterwards, I was able to do a little bit of press for the entire event. So I was collaborating with Manuel Guaman, who was a participant in this residency, who is a member of the Saraguro community in the south of the country, which is an Andean community. And so I was invited as a guest on his talk show for Radio Willick. And yeah, I think that about sums up the work that I wanted to show for you today. Again, I think Fulbright projects are quite expansive, and I think many of us are working in a lot of different areas over time. And so I am really grateful to be able to kind of synthesize, my highlights from this process. But I think that it's, worth noting that there's just so much more depth and so much more conversation that can be had here. So with that, I really appreciate everyone's time, and I look forward to hearing from Christine as well.
Thank you, Derek. That last picture with her looking up was really a great ending piece. And I'm not gonna be able to get that picture of your tent out of my mind. That's so cool. Awesome. Great. So we're gonna talk more, but I want to turn it over to Christine, and we will at the end talk, answer questions, whatever it is. But take it away, Christine.
Sounds great. It was so great to hear from Derek too. It's actually our first time meeting, so it's exciting to hear about your project. Yeah, so I graduated in painting in 2019 and also with a minor in theory and history of art and design. So my proposed project for Fulbright was searching for figurative representations of women in Korean art. And just to also say as a note that I am Korean American. And so I think when I was initially thinking about what country I wanted to go to as my host country, I was pretty clear from the start that I was interested in Korea. And at the bottom, you'll note that I was technically part of the 2019 cohort, but because of COVID, I was in Korea from 2020 to 2021. And so the timeline had been adjusted, and I was supposed to go August 2019, but I ended up going February 2020. And so there was a bit of, I wouldn't say problem, but the COVID pandemic definitely affected much of my grant even while I was in the country. And just to talk a little bit about timeline, because I think a lot of people are curious about the process of application. I think I went to my first info session when I was a sophomore, and then I kind of had that ideation that I wanted to, it would be a dream to get this kind of funding to be able to pursue my own research. And so I first started my application attempt the summer before going into junior year. And I think I got maybe about halfway through the first draft with Lisa. And then I realized that it was a bit much at the time for me. And so I shelved it, went through the semester, and then later the summer before my senior year reopened that draft, which I think was quite helpful to have the first attempt because I had already started looking into the country requirements. And likewise, Lisa and Derek mentioned this earlier too. Each country is going to have different language requirements. And Lisa had mentioned to me previously that for Korea, the language requirements fluctuate. So sometimes it was showing up as beginner level is acceptable, and other times it was showing up as intermediate is required. And so I had at Brown as a senior started taking Korean classes not only for the objective of meeting language requirements potentially for Fulbright, but just because I was interested as well personally in increasing my fluency. And in terms of affiliations, I do want to speak mostly about this because I think that reaching out to your affiliations, creating affiliations is one of the most hardest parts of the grants, but also one of the most rewarding and fulfilling parts of the application process. And I knew that I wanted to have one affiliate that was aligned with the institution, not only because that's a requirement, but because I'm interested in art history, but also wanted to have a artist, working artist affiliate. And things actually ended up aligning quite well. I did have initial struggle, I would say, in July, August, of cold emailing about 10, 15 people and reaching out. And of course, the replies varied. Some people didn't reply at all, and others were unsure even what Fulbright was or what kind of project I was interested in. And so I think just some advice that I can give in the affiliation stage is that you shouldn't be surprised if somebody, the person that you're reaching out to, doesn't know what Fulbright is, and don't be discouraged. I think oftentimes it's very assumptive to, think that your affiliate knows exactly what the program that you're trying to pursue is. So just a reminder to not be discouraged about that. But I cold emailed this artist who ended up being my secondary affiliate named Yoon Sung Nam. And while I was reaching out to several galleries and institutions, I had reached out to her gallery that she's represented by in Korea. And they let me know that she was going to be in Washington, D.C. for the first time at the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery and having her first U.S. museum show. And because this artist is actually in her 80s and our email communication was limited, I just had the feeling that if I had the chance to go meet her, it would be better to get my letter of affiliation signed in person. So I actually did have the chance to go to Washington, D.C. just for a few days and see her talk and see her work in person, and then also get the letter of affiliation signed in person, which was really wonderful. So this is her giving her talk at the National Portrait Museum. And this is us together. And on the right side is her colleague and also another professor named Hyunju Kim, who works in the field related to art history, but also very closely with this artist herself. And likewise, my first affiliate to go back was an institutional affiliation at a Korean university. And I was able to meet this professor who was a art history and theory critical studies professor of Korean art by reaching out to a other Korean professor who actually was studying in apparel studies, but she had presented at Brown University. And so I had remembered that connection. And then I kind of on a um, going out on a limb, I asked her if she had any recommendations for me, and she connected me with her colleague. And again, this was kind of in really good alignment at the time that Professor Chung was publishing and editing collaboratively this book, which is called Korean Art, Collision, Innovation, and Interaction, which is one of, I would say, the only comprehensive English books about the total like contemporary Korean art history. And so this book ended up being something that also really informed my grant and studies while I was in Korea and taking and auditing her PhD classes. And so unfortunately, one part of COVID that really affected my grant was not being able to go into the classes in person. So we were meeting on Zoom, and then I did have the chance to meet some of my classmates individually, but it wasn't quite the in-person connection that I had dreamed about and wrote about in my grant. So in terms of community engagement too, even though I had proposed a lot more community engagement with the university itself, a lot of that didn't end up coming into fruition. And this is going back to the secondary affiliate, the artist Yoon Sung Nam. Right after I arrived to Korea, I immediately went into a 2-week quarantine. And then right after the quarantine, I was able to catch her solo exhibition at Hakgoje Gallery, which is the gallery that had initially told me that she was going to be in the United States. And so this is us meeting again for the second time, me going to see her solo show. So these are some examples of the work. And initially, I was thinking that, of course, I wanted to go to Korea just to learn about my own history and experience being in Korea itself as somebody who is a member of the Korean diaspora. But I had some really great advice from a trusted professor who reminded me that it's really important to have a tight kind of elevator pitch about what I want to be studying specifically. So it wasn't quite enough in terms of being convincing for a grant project to just say that I wanted to study my diasporic history, but to really narrow in. So even though the scope of my interest was much larger than just learning about figurative representations of women, packaging it in that way, I think really helped me narrow in on my interests for what I wanted to do during the grant year and narrow in on the affiliates that I wanted to choose. And so these are some examples of Yoon Sung Nam's work. And just to give some context, she is still working as an artist now, but she began her arts career really late, you could say, in her 40s. I'm going to say traditionally later. And so this is us again when I visited her studio in Korea as well, again with Professor Kim, who I met in Washington, D.C. And so even though a lot of my grant activities were limited because of the pandemic, one of the most wonderful parts of the grant was being able to go visit the artist studio in person and just hear about her life as an artist and her history. So much of it is the living history of being in Korea as well. And so that was really formative to my grant. And these are more images of her studio. This is the upper level of her studio where she archives a lot of her earlier works as well. And again, some of her other self-portraiture works. And so additionally, a big part of my research interest while being in Korea was to continue my pursuit of becoming more fluent in Korean. So thankfully we did have a language stipend available to us. So I was able to use that stipend to get one-on-one lessons in Korean and really improve my fluency. So even now, of course, I'm not like 100% bilingual, but it's a lot better than it was when I initially first started the grant. And so really being in the country and experiencing day-to-day life and having to navigate, I think was really influential to my practice as well. These are some of the more traditional Korean pigments that Yoon Sung-nam uses in her practice. And so in mentioning kind of specificity to your host country, I was also proposing that I wanted to study more traditional Korean mediums because I had felt that my art history exposure was mostly centered around a Western and Euro and US centric canon, and that goes material wise too. So my education at RISD was mostly centered around oil painting, but a big push for me and reasoning for me to be in Korea and specifically learn from this artist was not only her figurative representations of women, but also her use of more traditional materials. This is an image of my studio that I had while in Korea. And initially I had tried to propose to have a studio in the university itself, but that didn't end up working out just because the students at the time also had very limited studio spaces. So I did have to pursue looking for my own studio space, which thankfully there were some RISD alumni around in Korea who were working as artists. So I reached out to them to inquire about how to go about looking for a studio space. But thankfully, the studio space was right in front of the university. So the few times that I did go to the university, I was able to be in close proximity. This is an example of one of the works that I made during the grant. And actually, it's interesting because while I came to study figurative representations, as to inform my practice better. Now that I have continued to study that, I'm actually more taking a step back from figurative representations because I realized that from a diasporic lens, that might be more relevant than for artists who are currently in Korea because they are seeing themselves represented in the more mainstream media. And as a kind of culmination of the grant too, I was able to connect with a different diasporic artist who I overlapped with in Korea. And we had a two-person show together that was actually curated by another RISD student at the time who was passing through Korea for the summer. And so that was kind of a really lovely way to be in community with a new friend and also old members of a RISD community. And the friend on the right side is also a RISD painting colleague. So she had graduated at this point and then returned to Korea. And so she was able to come to my show. And just to kind of loop things around to where I am currently. So I'm actually still in Korea post-grant, although that wasn't the intention initially. So if you can see some of the background of this work, it's actually the Korean homework that I was doing during the grant year. And so still the grant has continued to inform so much of my practice now. And of course, I'm still in Korea. So living here and really being able to immerse myself in the art scene more long term has been great as an extension of the grant. So that's basically my experience. And so thank you so much for letting me talk more about that. And I look forward to hearing the questions that now Kevin will transition us to.
Thank you. That was great. You know, hold on, I'm waiting for my video. It's very slow. Okay, there it
There
is.
you are.
I was thinking when you were talking about, COVID and not having the in-person experiences that you kind of had imagined, that maybe because of COVID, though, it was slower, people were really generous and you had a very intimate experience. So,
Right. I
yeah,
would say that the community interactions that I was able to have are more one-to-one.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it all speaks to, flexibility and adaptability and whatever happened in the world, that's what's, happening on your Fulbright too. So you can't put those things on hold. You just go with it. So anyway, thank you. That was great. That was fantastic. So much valuable information. And so I think we are ready for your questions. And if you don't have questions or don't know what your questions are, that is just fine. We have lots of things we can talk about and think of some of the common questions that we've heard from other people. And so Kevin, I'll kind of turn it over to you. I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat while we get things going.
So the first question was regarding the sound at the start, and we did have a glitch, so apologies for that, and we tried the best to increase the sound. So just to address that. The next question, though, just came in, and it is for you, Christine. Did you find it difficult to engage in technical, abstract conversations about art in Korea due to your fluency level? Did you need to study specific terms in particular to catch up quickly?
So that's a great question. Thankfully, a lot of the master's and PhD students that I was interacting with were already very fluent in English as well. So they were quite generous to me in understanding that my fluency level in Korean wasn't the same as theirs. But in terms of being able to like understand, I took the PhD classes online and I was sitting in on the session. And of course, there's no way that I understood like 100% or even 80% per se, but I really was just trying to let it all kind of like wash over me and really be open to even just absorbing the images that they were showing during the lecture because it was so different than the art history that was being taught or I had previously learned in the United States.
For both of you, as you weighed pursuing a Fulbright, and Christine, it was interesting to hear how you started and then you came back to a draft later, but were there other grants that you were considering and if you did apply to other grants, were there any conflicts with doing the grants at the same time or any issues like that?
So I can jump in here. Um, Sorry, it froze for a second. So when I received my Fulbright, that was my second application. So I had actually applied one other time before. So it was similar to Christine, where I had been working before my senior year and to push through an application. I did end up pushing it through. However, at the same time, I was unsure about what my future was going to look like. I was unsure if I would get the Fulbright or anything else. So at the same time, I chose to apply for a Maharam fellowship as well. And so I received the Maharam. I did not receive the Fulbright. And what that enabled me to do was to go to Ecuador and work with the folks who at the time were going to be my affiliates for the Fulbright and learn more about the country and learn more about what my interests were and what was possible. It was through that process that I think that I found out that parts of my original application weren't as feasible, or that I was proposing to be working in areas of the country that were maybe a little bit dangerous. Anyways, all of this was found out, on my Maharim, and I think that the relationships that I had built during that time eventually led to my affiliates for the second application for Fulbright. And I believe that because of that, it led to a stronger and more just realistic application as well.
It definitely is an issue often with grants and fellowships of persistence and not giving up and applying again. And it's great to hear how successful that sequence worked for you, Derek. And then for Christine,
What question for Derek? There was a year between too, wasn't there?
Right.
Right? So you applied and then you actually took a whole year and then came back, right?
Yes, yes. And in that time, I'd actually received funding from the Spur Fund.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So I was able to do a little bit more time in Ecuador as well.
Awesome. And Christine, you were already thinking about the Fulbright as a sophomore, right? Which is incredible. We love that. But did you find any conflict with any other grants? And of course, you were impacted by COVID as well. So,
Right. I actually didn't find conflict with other grants, but while I was in Korea on the Fulbright Korea had emailed us to let us know that there was another fellowship called, it was by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Korea. And so that fellowship was like linking various graduate study students from other fields. And so I was on that fellowship while on Fulbright. So thankfully, because of that, I actually met a lot of other US graduate students, and there was like several lectures or forums. And then after Fulbright, one of the girls that I met through that fellowship ended up being my roommate. So it was very interesting how that all came together. But
awesome. Lisa, this may be a question for you. Do you have an idea if or how the current political administration impacts the approval of particular research topics, even just topics centered on women, like Christine's, for example?
It is such a great question. The short answer is we don't really know. There's not the Fulbright always has been and is a U.S. government grant. So you always, when you're applying for Fulbright, do have to think about the host country and the United States and what their priorities are. But yes, there has been a major shift, and it is important to sort of read between the lines and make really thoughtful decisions. So in our applicants last year that applied in the fall 2025, they made very careful and very thoughtful decisions about wording, choices. They really had to think more so than they had in the past. We don't know yet if we have 8 semifinalists, so we don't know. We'll probably know more soon. So yeah, again, I don't know. I'm happy to help. We'll have other people look and think about things, think about different angles, think about different wording, and try to work through that together. And again, the political climate is also changing. So we have to kind of think about it in the moment. So we're here to help, I guess. And yeah, definitely things have changed since Christine and both Derek applied. Derek, I don't know if you have any comments when you were in Ecuador last spring, if you would anything you were hearing or seeing being right there.
Yeah, it's always been an interesting question. Even when I was applying and the administration was much friendlier in terms of the language that could be used, right? I remember, Lisa, it felt like it was still a risk to, create a project that was about indigenous sovereignty, that was about, multinational diversity. And what that would mean, especially since Ecuador itself is a more conservative country. So yeah, in terms of just the existing state of things, I just remember while I was there was a lot that was up in the air. There was a lot that was changing constantly, and folks were getting information in real time. I think that, there was this sense of, like for example, in a country like Ecuador that is predominantly, folks who are either indigenous or mixed indigenous, right? This sense of how we view diversity or how we view these terms, right? Like that's going to be kind of an innate part of how you apply to the country of Ecuador. And so even though there are perhaps things that, from the American lexicon, we can say maybe are not as friendly at this moment, that it's also worth noting that the countries do have a say in, advocating for what their needs are in this context as well. And so I think that my really advice, like what I've heard is really just, know your country well, and also, know what kind of narratives and stories your country wants to be telling at this time, and see if you can tap into that.
Yeah. Excellent.
And I would just ask Christine, I know this is probably not a fair question, but if you were to rewrite it today, do you, as you're kind of thinking about this, are there things that you would have done a little differently?
So, yeah, I did want to speak on this a little bit because even when I was preparing my grant, which was in 2019, that is like in the midst of Trump's first term. And I know that right now things have gotten a lot stricter in terms of like what words are even allowed to be used, right? Or flagged. But I did write in my grant that I wanted to pursue this research because Korea's art history had been impacted by like imperial US and Japanese histories. So, I mean, I did like refrain from saying more than I wanted to, but at the same time, I still said what I, wanted to say. So, I think if you're applying through RISD especially and not at large, like you can really lean on the support of Lisa as well and bounce that off of her on in terms of like what you think you should be writing in the statements. So yeah, it's difficult to say like what exactly is okay and what's not, right? But I think ultimately you do want to be writing something that's true to the research that you want to pursue. So
Right.
Yeah, it's a balance. You have to be authentic. You have to be your true self. We want you out there. We want your voices out there. We also want you to get the grant.
So we do have another question. How do you all feel like the Fulbright grant fits into or maybe leads to long-term career goals within your creative practice?
I can jump in first if that's okay. Yeah, so like I mentioned, I ended up staying in Korea. Again, not initially, that was not my intention, but just because after the grant, I felt like I really wanted to spend some more time in Korea, having never previously lived here before as a Korean American. And currently, I'm working freelance as a English tour guide at the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Korea. And I think that is also directly related to kind of my experiences in career history that I got through Fulbright, and just continuing after the grant, even though I'm not like fully integrated into what I would say is like the Korean art scene. Had I not come through Fulbright, I think it would be much more difficult to find community here. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I think with many grants, but with Fulbright specifically, it really does open the door to a lot of possibilities. But what I mean by that is that it really gives you a chance to have a proof of concept for what your creative interests are, what your research interests are. I think that it gave me a really large opportunity to try things out and see what was working. Not all of them did. And I think that I have grown a lot as an artist, but also as a person who is constantly collaborating with people, as a person who is constantly articulating what my art and design practice is, sometimes to people who are not artists and designers. So yeah, I think that, it really did help to sharpen those professional skills that you're not going to develop necessarily while you're at an institution at school. But outside of that, one thing that I did take away that is really exciting is that I was able to work a lot with a lot of intergovernmental NGOs and nonprofits. And I think that has definitely set me onto a path more in that kind of humanitarian art and design space, which again, I remember writing about it a lot when I was at RISD with Kevin, with Lisa, and it was all speculative. But now I actually have the ability to prove that I can act on that. And I think that a proof of possibility is something that Fulbright really could not have done without having that Fulbright.
Yeah, it's such an excellent point, Eric. It's great. I'm going to take you both back to the application and being at RISD and whether in architecture, painting, or any department, how did you select the pieces that would represent your proposal? Because there's both the work that you really believe in, but then also considering how it pairs with the proposal that you are putting forth. So if each of you could speak to that, that would be great.
I'll jump in first.
Okay, thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, so I also was going through the application process during my senior year. And so I think it's actually, on one hand, it's like a lot to balance at once, but on the other hand, you're preparing your thesis anyways, or your degree project. And so in lieu of that, I was already preparing like the themes and portfolio around similar interests. And so I think it was a really natural transition to just show what I had been preparing for that in the Fulbright portfolio process.
Great. And Derek?
Yeah, because I was able to submit two portfolios, I definitely had a journey between them. And I think that something that I learned while on the grant and something that I still think about is that architecture, is legible to certain audiences and certain people. And I think that something that my first portfolio did was really focus a lot on the kind of capital A, very specific way that we talk about it within the industry. But over time in working with people, explaining my ideas and projects, and then getting to apply again. At this time, I'd also had time in Ecuador, so I was able to. This was the kind of beginning of my photography stint, which has now become a really important part of my practice. I was kind of able to bring in, I would say, just a more well-rounded version of what I wanted research to be, not in just architecture. And, actually, if you were to ask me if I were to like, apply again, I might even consider applying under photography and not under architecture. So, yeah.
I was going to ask about that too. You did both
Mhm.
times apply through architecture, correct? I'm pretty sure you
Correct.
did.
Yeah.
Because people can be multidisciplinary artists for sure, of course, for Fulbright, but you do have to pick a category because there's a lot of you. And so they have to put you in boxes to review. So you do have to choose a discipline and then make a case under that discipline. But I do remember conversations with you, Derek, about, I mean, even sort of craft at some point of, are you going to focus on that? So there are different ways you can angle it. A lot of times it depends on who your affiliate ends up being. That can help make the case for what discipline you apply under, and kind of thinking about your audience. So yeah, but you do have to pick one. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I can't pick one, but you do have to pick a category to apply through.
Yeah. Now, so much time goes into the proposal and the rewrites and the back and forth and rethinking. When you both gave such fantastic, you know, insights and overviews of the actual experiences that unfolded and at times how things change. But how close to both of your experiences did they match the proposal? And then if it was veering away from the proposal, when did you find it letting go and maybe opening up to the fact that, other things can happen and tangents can happen and, challenges can be encountered, et cetera?
Okay, I can jump in
Mhm.
first this time. So I would say that I knew arriving the first week in Ecuador that whatever I had proposed and said I was going to do on paper was probably not going to be the direction that I was going to head in. And that was at the time that there were huge wildfires outside the city of Quito. My Fulbright, the 1 week of orientation actually got shut down in the middle of it because of just the dangerous situation and whatnot. And so, anyways, I definitely learned very quickly that I was going to, roll and meander and try to figure things out as I went. I would say that the heart of my proposal always stayed the same. I think that the sentiment and the deep philosophical thinking behind it, was always kind of at the center. I think that as an artist and a researcher, you're always going to keep what drives you and what motivates you. Of course, I kept loosely, my major affiliates, but I think as we learned, some of them became minor
Mhm.
affiliates and other affiliates became more important affiliates throughout the process. And in terms of, thinking about like just priority and retooling as I went, um, I mean, something I think that, yeah, was just important was really sticking to the kind of the moral, right, of what I had proposed. So it
Mhm.
was not such a literal interpretation, but it was, sticking to, how can I best um, reach the heart of what I wanted to do, which for me was to, work with indigenous communities around architecture, cultural preservation and sovereignty, but really to create that intercultural dialogue. And that's kind of what led me to this workshop at the end of my time, which was not something that I'd proposed. I think I said I was going to make an exhibit with one of my affiliates in
Mhm.
my application. So
Right. No, wonderful. And Christine, impacted by COVID, so inevitably were challenges, but how did you feel about the progression of the experience in relation to your proposal?
Yeah, I think flexibility was a huge theme for
Mhm.
that year.
Yeah.
Just like even the start of the grant the timeline was different than imagined. And similar to what Derek just mentioned, I think my affiliates is one thing that remained as like a core consistency, like my interest in them and what they were
Mhm.
working on. And so otherwise, a lot of the community engagement that I had proposed, like working more closely with the students at the affiliate university, those were all in flux, right, because of the pandemic. But I think that if you are uh, pursuing your grant, even if it's not COVID, like there's no need to be stressed if your plan and your actual grant year
Mhm.
varies, right? Because I think regardless, like you're already there and you're experiencing so many wonderful things being there. So nobody's gonna like come after you because what you proposed and what you're doing is not like
Mhm.
one for one match. So yeah, I think it's important to just stay open about it.
can I add to that quickly as well? Sorry, one thing. Um, my commission, they had resources available for us, and it was pretty clear for the researchers when we arrived that we were selected because we showed the ability to be able to do research, but not necessarily because they were expecting us to act on that exact project.
Mhm.
Ecuador is a bit of a unicorn in the Fulbright orbit in the sense that they do expect people to have some sort of familiarity with the country beforehand, and that's mostly just because it can be a bit of a dangerous place depending on where you're at, and it really does take a higher level of just self-awareness to get around. But because of that, it did lend itself to having a lot of flexibility. So.
Mhm. Wonderful. And for everyone who's still joining us, please note as we wrap up, any final questions you want to put through the Q&A, we can address to Christine and Derek or to Lisa. And I guess as we are concluding, this is the kind of cliched question to always ask, but would each of you have one or two takeaways to for those attending to pursue this fellowship and why it's important to do so?
Did we freeze there for a second?
Thinking, just thinking.
That's
I'll
okay.
go ahead. Yeah, I think one takeaway is, as Lisa and Kevin have mentioned, like it is a very extremely comprehensive and extensive application. And I think there will be times that you're going through it where you're considering maybe I want to give up, maybe I want to try a different year, which I did as well, right? I shelved it and revisited it before officially applying. But I think now that I'm on the other side and have gone through that kind of application, it really is such a good opportunity to go through that process with a lot of support from RISD. And it really sets you up to be able to handle other applications for grants and fellowships. I don't think that in my 5 years since doing that grant that there has been such a extensive application. So really it is like good training for that. And then secondly, I think I would say that, yeah, just again, like not to be too stressed if things don't go according to plan, but really trust that the connections that you meet, the people that you're introduced to are really there to support you on your grant year, and you're going to, be able to really utilize that network even past the grant year. So, and to not only utilize the new network, but I think that if you do have the privilege of having some RISD alumni around you in your host country that you go to definitely reach out to them and activate that community too.
Yeah. Wonderful. And Derek?
Yeah, just for my own reference, could you paraphrase the question one more time so I'm on track?
Yeah, no, just one or two takeaways for why, this is such an important fellowship to pursue, and it is worth the time and it is worth the effort, and to do so.
Yeah, so, the first thing I would say is that, it really is an exercise in just being, culturally interested, right? I think that I've probably heard the term cultural exchange a million times while I was there on this grant, but I think it's true, right? I think for me, it really, did teach me a lot about working with people, understanding my own identity as a creative person, but also understanding, the pluriverse of possibilities out there kind of in the world and ways to interact with people. And, in general, I think Fulbright, they look for people who are passionate about the countries that they're applying to, but who are also just interested in learning more genuinely. And I really carry that kind of sense of curiosity, I think, a lot in the rest of my work. And then I guess the second part, I would say that, something about Fulbright at least personally, taught me a lot about diplomacy and, again, just like working as an agent, perhaps just as part of, like beyond yourself, right? I had done a lot of policy work at Brown while I was at RISD and had spent a lot of time just working with different constituents, doing lobbying, activism, and that sort of thing. And Fulbright, I think, really prepared me as well to understand that world. And I don't think I plan to step into policy again. I don't think I plan to be a policymaker, but I think that it really did help to, situate, especially in the world of architecture, like who is it that you are constantly working with in a lot of these creative practices. And so having that context is something that I will carry, and I hope that others can, incorporate into their work as well.
Yeah. Absolutely awesome. And Lisa, over to you for final thoughts.
No, thank you so much, Christine and Derek. I think, I hadn't really, we had some email exchanges, obviously, during your experience and after, but it was really fun to see it all together. It's such a journey from, yes, your first meeting you and just hearing that you were interested to here we are. So yeah, it's just really exciting to see this. It's an experience, and it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. I loved how, like, Christine, your work has your Fulbright sort of homework on it. Like, it's, yeah, literally still part of your journey. So thank you all, and thank you all for listening. The video tutorial is on the RISD Careers Fulbright webpage. So again, we apologize for the sound at the beginning. Hopefully you can watch it there if you'd like. Also, this event will be recorded, and then it will be a new tutorial in April because the new cycle is opening very soon. So excellent. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Reach out for support. We're here. We're happy to help, and we're your teammates on this. So reach out.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Derek, and huge thanks to Lisa for doing such an incredible job with everyone in the program. So, bye, everyone.
Bye.